So thanks for coming out. Do appreciate it. Before I get started, I do want to give a shout out. There's a new book coming out. I actually have a preprint of it, but this will be out very soon in the new year, called Live from the Underground, A History of College Radio, by Catherine Rye Jewell. She's a professor at Fitchburg State in Massachusetts. I've been chatting with her about the history of college radio for the last several years. It's an amazing book if you're at all interested in sort of the glory days of college radio, the 80s and 90s especially. This is the book. It is really, really well done. Radio itself begins in 1920. The first broadcast radio station goes on the air in November 1920, KDKA in Pittsburgh, and very few other technologies take off as fast as radio. Within weeks, there are dozens of stations across the country. Within a few months, there are hundreds of stations. I mean, most technologies start off kind of slow. Radio starts off like that. I can't think of anything else that gets quicker adopted than radio. And colleges get in on this too. Very quickly, colleges set up their own stations. These are all AM stations, by the way. University of Nebraska and Iowa State go real big into this as part of their land grant mission, so that they can reach people at home, out on the farms and stuff like that. Electrical engineering departments get interested, amateur clubs, and I do have to give a shout out to the S&T Radio Club, which was founded 100 years ago, 1923, and has been around ever since. So there's a long history of interest in radio at colleges. Most of these early college stations, though, die off pretty quickly. The ones that do exist by 1940 are semi-professional. They are giving a wide variety of different sort of programming. They are not run by the students. And a lot of them, especially here, kind of just north of here, more on the Great Plains, but Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, a lot of them do what we would call distance learning today. They broadcast a lecture so that you don't have to go to college anymore. You can listen to this great professor give his talk from your home somewhere in North Platte, Nebraska, or something like that. College radio, what we would think of as college radio, begins more or less in the 1930s. Brown University out in Rhode Island starts a carrier current radio station. I'm not an electrical engineer, so I don't really understand carrier current, but it's something where you don't need a license. You're not really broadcasting. The radio signal is going through the wires. You can pick it up if you have a radio set like right next to your outlet, but that's about it. But the best thing about it for colleges is you don't need an FCC license. So you can go on the air, if you will, within the dorms or within the campus and play all sorts of different things. Brown begins this in the 30s, and a lot of other universities, especially in the Northeast, start this. And this has a bit more of a student flavor. It may not always be by students, for students completely, but the students are much more involved in this. FM stations like KMSM and KMNR take a little while to emerge. The FCC reassigns frequencies in 1946. Originally, the FM band was down around 54 to 75 megahertz. They reassign it in 1946 to what it is today. When they do that, they carve out the lower section, the 88s, 89s, and 90s, for what they call non-commercial educational programming, not the big commercial stations. But not much happens in the 40s and 50s in this non-commercial educational sort of realm. So what about here in Raleigh? About 1961, and I have to say about because I haven't found a more concrete date than that, but about 1961, in the quad, the dorms, KMFA, the frequency letter, the letters they kind of gave to themselves, a carrier current station starts broadcasting, quote unquote. KMFA were not their official call sign, Since carrier current stations are not regulated by the FCC, they don't need a call sign. But the dorms down at the quad were what? Kelly, McInerney, Farrar, and Altman, KMFA. So that's why they picked KMFA for their call sign. It was a carrier current station. If you were in the dorms, you could pick it up in your room, and that was it. Didn't go anywhere else. But beginning with KMFA, the students say, wouldn't it be great if we could have a real station so that if you weren't in the dorms, if you lived somewhere else in town, you could pick it up. They go to the administration, and the administration says, well, that's a good idea. Write us a proposal. Throws it back onto the students. You want this? Write up a proposal, investigate with the FCC what it would take to do this, and the students do that. And one of the keys about the history of KMSM, KMNR is it's almost always very strongly a student-supported initiative, student-supported radio from the very, very beginning. So the students do, and if you know anything about the FCC or any sort of regulatory agency, they don't move generally very quickly. So it takes a little while for this to happen. Throughout 1962 and 1963, they get all, the forms turned in. During the summer of 63 and the fall of 63, they carve out a studio in what was then T6. And finally, January 2nd, 1964, KMSM is on the air. At 7 a.m., January 2nd, boom, that's the beginning of college radio here in Raleigh. I have not yet found evidence that proves otherwise. KMSM, I'm pretty sure, was the first college radio station, or excuse me, the first student radio station, let me rephrase that, in the state. We were also the first FM station in the area at all. Probably between St. Louis, Springfield, and if not Jeff City, Columbia. The only college station I found that's an FM station that's a little earlier was at Central Missouri State, which went on the air in 1962. But it was more of what we would think of today as an NPR type station. It was not really a student station. Initially a 10-watt transmitter. The antenna was located on top of Harris Hall, and I've got a picture here in a bit. Upgrade the transmitter to a 250-watt transmitter in 1967. There are stories that it was Army surplus, that somehow they got it on the cheap. I don't know. Again, documentation sometimes on all this stuff is a little hard to come by. This is underlined because this is what they said we need a radio station for. To broadcast stuff that you can't hear locally. Now, what could you hear locally in Raleigh in 1962, 63, 64? A whole lot of country and pop. And that was it. So they say, well, we want some jazz. We want classical. We want folk. We want stuff that we can't hear locally. And that's a theme that you still have today. KMNR will broadcast what you can't hear otherwise. First home is in T6. Not the best picture, but here's Harris Hall. You can kind of recognize Harris Hall. This white temporary building is T6, hence the T for temporary. They were temporary buildings built during and right after World War II. They were built to exist for maybe 5 years, and most of them existed for 50. Some of you, yeah, you're nodding. You guys can remember the temporary buildings. This up here is the antenna, and that's T6. And we'll take a tour of it in 1996 before they tore it down here in a little bit. Thankfully, the FCC's put most of their records and stuff online. Navigating the databases is a fun exercise, but once you dig through them enough, you can find some real gems like this, the official construction permit and license records for KMSM. So here's the frequency, 88.5, TPO, transmitter power, 10 watts, which isn't very much. That would cover sort of downtown Rolla. And that would be about it, not much more than that. The construction permit issued in the fall of 63, officially licensed by 64. You can see down here in 1967, upgrade the transmitter. Transmitter is 250 watts, but the ERP, the effective radiated power, was 300. Don't ask me how that happens. I'm not an electrical engineer, but it's all magic to me. And don't look down here yet, because we're going to come to that in a few minutes. The early yearbooks have some great stuff on early KMSM. This is from the 1964 yearbook. Here's the studio itself, and we've got a couple DJs here. Does it kind of look similar? I mean, I could set you down there almost 60 years ago, and you'd probably be able to figure it out before too much. You know, I mean, you've got dials instead of sliders, but there's the turntables. You make sense of it. Again, sort of here, if you go to KM&R today, you'll see these same sort of glass windows separating studio spaces. I kind of want to call your attention up here too, to the staff. Notice anything interesting about that picture for 1964? It's not entirely white guys, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
There's like a woman in the middle.
There's a woman in the middle. There's an African-American over there on the end. This is another characteristic of college radio. Generally, I mean, it reflects sort of what the campus looks like. But KM&R, KMSN has always been a little more diverse, not only in its musical taste, but in its membership. And when I first saw this, I said, oh, wow, this goes back to the very beginning. This is from the next year. This is the 1965 yearbook. Live broadcast. Here they are live broadcasting a basketball game. They did live broadcasts of most of the sports events, which if you think about it, using mid-1960s technology is a challenge, a real challenge. But they were able to do it. What I really like about this picture too is within the first year, we're doing recording sessions with bands. We're doing live on airs of bands, which we still do. And that tradition goes back, again, to 1964, as long as the station's been around. This is a little bit later. This is about 1970, but still KMSM. This sort of font that they chose was sort of their logo for a long time, kind of a modernist. It almost looks a Bauhaus type font to me. You see back here, and you'll see him again, Chuck the Duck, which was the early mascot of KMSM. Chuck looks suspiciously like another duck that was in a National Lampoon magazine in the late 1960s. And again, you can just tell from hairstyles that this is not 1964 anymore. The big change happens in 1972. That's why KM&R is KM&R and not KMSM anymore. That's why we have KMST. We have this big, huge change. And again, the students step up here. So 1972, NPR, National Public Radio, is expanding throughout the country. You have stations in St. Louis, stations in Kansas City, but there's nothing that serves the Ozarks as a whole. So NPR takes over the 88.5 frequency, rebrands it as KUMR, just changes the call letters, builds a huge new transmitter south of town. It's out Highway O, several miles out toward Lecoma, 100,000 watts, big tower. I mean, if you listen to 88.5 now, you can pick it up all over the Ozarks. This is a big new station. So the students say, well, hey, what about us? The university initially did not have any plans to continue the student station. The students themselves said, hey, no, this is important to us. because again, it's playing stuff that we can't hear locally. It serves a real campus and community need. They organize, they mobilize, they convince the university to continue funding, at least in a small scale, this student station. But we have to change frequencies and we have to change call letters. One of the great things about Rolla is we're kind of in the middle of everywhere, right? If we were in a large city, that frequency might not have been open. But in Rolla, it is. So it's not a problem to change frequencies. They changed to 89.7 from 88.5. The studio facilities are the same. They do get a new transmitter out of the deal. It's not a more powerful transmitter, but it's in stereo now, which I see people smiling, is a big deal, especially think about the music of the late 60s, 1970s. You don't really want to listen to that in mono on a little transistor radio. You want to listen to that in stereo, preferably in headphones. The official FCC license for this change comes down in March of 74, but it really all happens in 72 and 73. Again, it takes a while for the bureaucratic paperwork to get going. And here's the record from the FCC. Construction permit for new educational FM on 89.7. HAAT is height above effective terrain. That's sort of how high the antenna is, but not exactly. Effective radiated power, again, is the same. Did get a new transmitter, but it's not any more powerful. So that's the beginning of KMNR in 1972. I just found this looking through KMNR archives. Here we've got both mascots. You've got Chuck the Duck over here, although his tie doesn't say KMSM anymore. And you've got Snapman, which is still KMNR's mascot to this day. Snapman, as I understand it, is based off of, but is significantly different than a musical note illustration on the first album released by Commander Cody and his Lost Planet Airmen in 1971. It has his version of Hot Rod Lincoln on it, if you know that song. So the 70s is sort of campus changes significantly. The culture around campus changes significantly in the 70s. For most of its existence, KMNR was free format. That means the DJ plays within regulatory requirements, whatever the DJ wants for most of its existence. For many semesters, they were on a 24/5 or perhaps a 24/7 operation during the semester if they could get enough DJs. On weekends, a lot of times they weren't able to fill out the entire schedule. And again, this is well before any sort of automation. So you either have someone in there spinning records or the station's off the air. KMNR sponsored concerts, dances, parties, all sorts of stuff. And most of these go back to the early 70s. In the fall was generally the Freakers Ball, which was often a Halloween party. Not every year, but usually. Spring for a long time was Glitter Ball, which was the big sort of sparkly ball, kind of a more disco upscale event for a long time. And again, as early as the 70s, KMNR had its mobile music, the Roadshow, which originally was just a couple turntables and some speakers so that you could take music to events, take it to fraternity events, take it to campus events, even community events, and provide as well sort of a PA system, a microphone so that people could speak. Beginning pretty quickly in the 70s, KMNR becomes a counterculture sort of place. There were a lot of folks that played Grateful Dead and Grateful Dead sort of songs, but Rolla also experiences its first metal shows in the late 70s, as well as sort of prog rock stuff, which is, you know, artists like Yes or Rush, where you put the album on and the song is 20 minutes long, kind of stuff. So, and this is where I sort of pulled my title for my talk here, providing Rollo with the widest spectrum of music. This is one of the 1970s bumper stickers that they created. I got a whole bunch of more recent ones up here, and they're all extras. So if anybody wants one when we're done, you're more than welcome to come and snag a couple. I pulled this picture from the 1979 yearbook. Looks a little different than 1964. There's a lot of weird stuff going on here. The more you look at it, the more you see, too. One of the first things is all these boxes in the back here that say AP fan fold teletype. Those are all paper boxes. KM&R had a teletype machine, and it needed paper to print out the latest news and information and sports scores and all that sort of stuff. Before we all had these in our pockets, the only way to get the latest, like breaking news, was off the wire, off the AP wire. And KM&R had one of those to give the latest information. So if you needed the latest sports score, you could call up KM&R and say, hey, especially a team that you couldn't hear locally, hey, did the Cleveland Browns win? As soon as it's finalized, the printer prints it out. More albums in the background here. In the late 70s, T6 was a temporary building, so the university didn't really care what the students did with it. So they let them paint stuff on the walls. You'll see some other stuff, but they painted a giant 747 on the walls. But look at the staff here. What is going on with the staff? We got a guy playing a flute in a top hat. I don't know what this guy's got on his hat. Looks like a toilet scrubber or something. We've got some sort of mercenary over here. I don't think that's a person. I like all the KM&R shirts though. But yeah, this gives you a flavor for KM&R in the late 70s. Very much seen as sort of a sanctuary on campus and a place to get away from everything else. During the 80s and 90s, KM&R continues in T6 in the temporary building, still student run. One of the unique things about KM&R, and I never realized how unique I think this is until I started talking to a lot of other college radio places, but KM&R has been always student run, completely. Even student stations at other places have usually one or two sort of paid staff that file the forms and keep things legal. KM&R has never had a staff. But there was a fight in the early 80s about formatting the station, and the station was formatted for a while. For at least a couple semesters, format as in like classic rock or country or things like that. Allegedly, and this is all sort of second and third hand stories that have been told to me, the student council was saying, you guys aren't playing stuff that the students like. So here's what they did a survey, students like X, classic rock, you guys need to play this or we're gonna cut your funding. And KM&R said, well, okay. And they did that for a year. And then of course you get new student council officers and things go back to normal, which is free form. The glory days of college radio, and when college radio becomes a thing, really is sort of the late 80s and 90s. And you see the rise of alternative music as opposed to classic rock. And even the term classic rock is really, you start hearing it about 1985, but it takes off in the late 80s. I was here during the late 80s and early 90s. I remember that there were some battles amongst the students over sort of what sort of music should KM&R play? Should it be a venue for new music and obscure music? Should we play just whatever we want? Should we cater to the students' needs? And that's not unique. Lots and lots of other stations had those battles, as Professor Jewell talks about in her great book. 1989, again, I was here. We had played rap and hip hop before that, but the first full 3-hour rap hip hop show goes on the air at KM&R in 1989. If anybody else remembers, Yo MTV Raps, the first rap show on MTV, was the fall of '88. So it's right about that same time. 1986, a new transmitter, same wattage, but they relocate the transmitter from actually physically in T6 to the Southwestern Bell building downtown, get the antenna up off of Harris Hall, get it much higher, get better range, covers the town better. Wattage is still the same, but transmitter height increases, so it works a lot better. And this is one of the early mid-'80s bumper sticker designs. This was painted on the wall for a while too. Can you find me? It's a really bad picture. I scanned it from the yearbook. Anybody? I'll give you a bumper sticker if you can find me. Should I give you a hint? You need a hint yet? Yes. I am wearing a St. Pat shirt.
Yeah. Are you wearing a hat?
I am not wearing a hat.
Are you guy in the back with the shades?
No.
Man. Are you in the way, way back behind everyone?
No. Anybody?
How long was your hair?
I had much more hair up here and much less down here.
Are you the young guy in the white shirt?
No, not wearing a white shirt.
Well, that makes it much harder to spot you.
I am right there.
Oh,
This is me right here. It's hard to tell, but that is me. Yeah. In 1992, KMNR, not college radio in Rolla, but KMNR, celebrated its 20th anniversary. We had some 20th anniversary swag. This is one of my favorite t-shirts. I still have this one somewhere with the cat. The cat actually was a cat of one of the DJs. They took a picture of it, put it on the shirt. This is again from the yearbook, but this I believe is 1985, which is what the station looked like. And you'll see that round tower with these things in it. These are not 8-track tapes, although they are the same size as an 8-track tape. These are carts, C-A-R-T-S. This is what all the programming was on. Station IDs, PSAs, sign-ons and sign-offs, all that. You put this in a machine, it would play for a few minutes, and click, you're done. And this is how everything was done before digitization in the late 90s. And we still have a bunch of these in the station because we don't really know what to do with them.
Have they been digitized?
Some have been digitized. I hope that we can eventually get them all because they're really a neat record. There's the back of that t-shirt, which I love because you got the giant lizard attacking a house. We adopted a highway for a while, and even though I'm not in this picture, I was here at this time and I recognized most of those people. I think Brent is probably watching online at the moment. He told me he was going to.
We've got a Bob, a Brandon, a Rick.
Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure.
Those are the ones that have commented.
Those are the ones that commented.
Brandon, you're out there, comments.
So one of the things that all the alumni from back in the day talk about is the physical location of KMNR, which was T6, this temporary building. And again, since it was a temporary building, we knew that we were the last ones who would ever be in there. The university kind of let us do whatever we wanted as long as we didn't burn it down. So the station and the students really customized the space to make it their own. So this is the main front door. It was torn down in 1996, 97. Before it was torn down, someone took some early digital photos. They aren't all the best quality, but we'll take a quick tour. Main front door, this is the side door. You can recognize some of the bumper stickers up here probably. You come into this door here, and this is the main lobby. Had a soda machine, posters all over the place. Here on this wall was originally where the 747 was. Then it got upgraded to a space shuttle for years. This chair, I think, finally died within the last 2 or 3 years. it made the transition much longer than I thought. I think we still have that sign-in thing at the station somewhere. But the best part of T6, remember, is it's literally right in the middle of campus. So students would stop in if they had an hour between classes or something. And again, you talk to alumni from the 70s, from the 80s, from the 90s, they say how nice it was to stop in and have a place in the middle of campus where you kind of decompress for a little bit. You walk out of the lobby, you walk into the library, which at this date had shelves for both CDs and for vinyl. We have way more of both now, although we're getting less and less because almost everything now is a digital release. Again, we could paint, so students got very creative with painting the walls. This is a dragon that was painted. This actually dates to the very early 80s. It is more or less a dragon off of a Jefferson Starship album. I forget which one, but this was painted in 1984. By 1996, you can see she's had some additions. She's got a septum piercing and an eyebrow piercing and a nose ring and some teeth, but we still have some interesting paintings on the wall in the new location as well. But the most famous location in T6, and if you talk to any of the alumni, they will talk about the bathroom. Because the students customized the walls of the bathroom. And every couple of years, they would tear it all down and repaint it, but put a lot of effort into making the walls of the bathroom very interesting. This wasn't just simply, you know, yeah, there's a little bit of just writing on the walls, but a lot of this is stuff that was cut out and, you know, appliqued to the walls, and the sort of like the letters like the kidnapper sends you with all the different like letters cut out from a magazine. They put stuff up like that. Again, talk to some old alumni and they'll mention the bathroom.
Online, they're saying Jeff Goldblum is watching you.
Yeah, Jeff Goldblum is currently watching us from our current restroom. The first move is 1997. After 50 years, T6 is finally slated to be demoed and finally gets demolished. So KM&R has to go somewhere else. They go to the corner of 12th and Pine, which is today the University Police. That building has been many things over the years. It was a bookstore, it was a fitness center, and then KM&R moved in. At the time, it was not a university-owned building. It was a leased building. But the university renovated the space and made it an amazing space for the radio station. Honestly, a nicer space than what we have now. Conveniently, it was next to the Grotto, which was the student bar right next door, which was close enough you could run a cable down there and do live broadcasts. They would often do request shows and stuff. They did fundraisers. The Rolla Animal Shelter got a lot of money from fundraisers that were held at the Grotto. You could request your song, they'd play it for $1 or $2. Increasing automation. By the late 90s, the software exists that we can go remote. We don't always physically have to have someone in the control room, which means 24/7, 365 operation. Don't have to turn the transmitter off when someone leaves the station anymore. Exactly when that happens, I'm not sure, but it's about 97, I think. Also web streaming. Certainly by 1998, we are web streaming too. First college station in the state to do so, I think. Not the first college station in the country, but the first in the state, I'm pretty sure, to broadcast live on the web. I don't have a lot of great pictures from the 12th and Pine location. This is from the yearbook. I think this is about 2000, but here's the main studio. Again, you can see the turntables here, records, CDs. The main board in the or in the control room, excuse me, is here. This board, which is a little bigger, was the board in the production room. There's a production room for doing all sorts of other stuff, and then the main control room. Recognize the old giant CRT monitor, but already by this time, a lot more stuff is being done digitally rather than paper or carts like these guys or anything else. But the 12th and Pine location is almost too good of a location for something like KMNR, and it was a leased location. The university does not like to lease buildings. They don't like money going out for leases. They want to either own stuff. So the story that we heard at the time was that the university was just letting its lease run out. Strangely enough, they then purchased the building and put, at first, housing offices in there, and then later the campus police. I think it's officially a university structure now that they own. But KMNR needs to move somewhere out of this space. So by now we've got all sorts of new residence halls, not just TJ, but the residential college. The quad is getting older, it's not needed as much. They move us into Altman Hall, which also contains all sorts of other offices and spaces. The Missouri Minor was in Altman Hall for a long time. So KMNR gets the entire first floor of Altman Hall. The students work again closely with campus physical facilities to get the space renovated. And it works quite well as student radio station space. So that brings us up more or less to today. One of the biggest changes in KMNR sort of technical history was in 2011, when we get a much more powerful transmitter and we move the antenna. We had been a 300-watt station for a long time. Transmitter, remembered, from 1986 till 2011 was at the Southwestern Bell building downtown, which, come to find out, we didn't really have any official paperwork for that. It was just kind of there because somebody knew somebody or something. So the more we looked into it, the kind of more scared we got and said, hey, we probably should move the transmitter. Plus, there were issues with access. It's much nicer to have the transmitter in a university facility where we can access it whenever we need. So we look into moving the antenna and the transmitter, move to TJ. The TJ North has a big radio tower on it. It had been vacated by a repeater of KOMU TV up in Columbia when TV went digital. So there was literal and figurative, literal space and RF spectrum space for KMNR up there. We got a new antenna, got a much more powerful transmitter. It's a 2,000-watt transmitter. The effective radiated power is 1,850, and a new, much taller tower greatly expands KMNR's range. You can pick KMNR up now down past Fort Leonard Wood. I've picked it up almost all the way to Jeff City. If you're at the top of the hill, you can get it up there, not down in town. You can get us up to about Cuba, and I haven't gone south in a long time, but I think you can get us well past Houston going south. KMNR alumnus, a guy named Greg Best, who had graduated in the early 80s, and it was with professional consultant, provided all the services, all the engineering services for free because he was an alum. So we named the control room after him. Here he is cutting the official ribbon, even though the control room had been in operation for years. We just named it after him. So he got to cut the ribbon. It's still the Greg Best control room, because we figured that's the least we can do for him saving us and saving the university thousands and thousands of dollars by doing this. So that brings us more or less up to today. Again, KMNR has always been a fully student-run station. There is no paid staff. Some of the student executive board get more of a stipend than a wage today. But there is no person on the student affairs staff that gets paid money for working with the station. I don't get paid anything for being the faculty advisor. It is a fully student-run volunteer station. All the student engineering work, with the exception of stuff that we needed like an outside consultant for, like Greg Best, all the software, all the library work is all student-written, student-run. Our automation software was written by the students. Our library access software was written by the students. I think the original version may have been a comp sci senior project in the early 80s. SCC licensed, we are officially licensed till 2029. So we are 100% legal, 24/7, 365 operation, unless the TJ Tower gets hit by lightning again, like it did back in July, and that caused all sorts of problems for a little while. But we're okay. All our production facilities are in Altman Hall. Again, the transmitters up in the TJ penthouse, the antennas up on top of TJ. Still do live on-air events. That's something that's been happening since 1964. I know we've got some coming up where we've got some bands coming in, provide concerts, usually funding for a concert or two on campus every year. KM&R Roadshow still exists. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they're out usually in front of Havener, providing tunes as you're walking in and out. They will take requests if you're nice to them. So go and talk to them. A little dark, but more or less what the control room looks like now. Over the years, stuff gets added to the control room and never really taken away. So this Emos box front has been there, I think, for a couple of years now. It should probably be disposed of, but there's stickers, there's, some Christmas lights. Still have the control board. You can see sort of in the background, there's still a couple turntables. Behind him is a whole rack of equipment, including CD players and other stuff, but much more is digital now. We have a significant digital library, and more new releases are coming out just in a digital form. So I've been speaking for too long, but I can talk about all this forever. KMSM, KM&R, some conclusions. Been a vibrant part of the campus and the community for 60 years, almost 60 years. I've talked to folks who just lived in Rolla, who were not students, but have very fond memories of KM&R, precisely because it played what you couldn't hear elsewhere. I have people who grew up in Rolla in the 90s have talked to me about that. People who grew up in Rolla in the 60s have talked to me about that. And all the way in the middle, how much they loved KM&R because it was different. Because you heard something you couldn't hear anywhere else. Our rural location helped it succeed. A lot of student stations, and she talks about that in her book, a lot of student stations are gone now in major metropolitan areas. They've been taken over. Universities see, hey, we can sell this frequency and make a little money. They've gone away. But out here in Rolla, we're kind of insulated from that, thankfully. Student radio, and I think you get the idea that students have stepped up several times in KMSM and KM&R's history to make sure that the station continues. Student involvement is very important in this radio station story. And this is a relatively new sticker, but it's one of my favorites. There's one or two, there's one up here. And this was on a t-shirt for a while. The students are surprisingly creative with the stickers and the t-shirts. All right, any questions? They did an official Nielsen rating survey in like 1972 to get some information to back up their claim that we need a student station. And KM&R came in second in the Rolla market, only to KTTR, the big country station. AM country station.
That translates into roughly
How many students volunteer at the radio station?
What are we at, about 75-ish? I think about 75 now. It varies over time. During COVID, it kind of cratered for a while. We're back up, essentially fully staffed now. It's varied over time. We have stuff from the 60s. We have some fairly rare like publicity releases that were not sold. They were only distributed to radio stations and things like that. I forget exactly how many individual albums we have. We have well over 50,000 artists in the library. Now, albums is, yeah, we're talking well into the six figures.
I have from the Zoom alumni DJ Ron Erickson here.
Hi, Ron.
Always heard that KMNR's physical CDs and vinyls was the largest in the state. Would you say that's valid?
I have no reason to doubt that. I know it is larger than any other college or any other student station I know of in the state. It is not the largest in the country for student stations, but it is might be the largest in the Midwest.
I think somebody told us.
There are collectors who have a larger collection, but yeah, for us, it's pretty amazing. Once you get back into the library, you find some real gems.
Another one from.
What's interesting though is KMSM, that call letters went to Montana State or Montana then School of Mines, Montana Tech now, as their student station. So it got recycled as another student station call sign.
I saw, there was an article, a really brief article that
KMSM as a call sign still exists, but it's now a commercial station in Montana.
shout out for KMFA because he was a DJ.
Oh, great. Yeah, KMFA actually lasted longer as a carrier current station. So you had two student stations for a long time. Anybody else? Anything else?
Do you still have the card player?
We still have cart players. I think they work. I don't know.
As an undergrad, I built thousands of those.
Thanks for coming.